The batting practice session was not supposed to be news. It was scheduled as a routine internal workout, the kind of closed, controlled environment that national team camps use to build rhythm and sharpen timing without the pressure of external observation. No cameras. No media. No theater. Then Shohei Ohtani walked to the mound. And everything that every coach, every teammate, every medical professional had carefully communicated about managing expectations, about cautious timelines, about the responsible stewardship of the most valuable athletic body on the planet, all of it was instantly, completely, and breathtakingly overridden by what happened next. The first pitch left his hand and the catcher's mitt exploded with a sound that stopped every conversation on that practice field simultaneously. Players mid-swing looked up. Coach's clipboard in hand turned toward the mound. The quiet, controlled rhythm of a professional batting practice session shattered into something that felt less like preparation and more like witnessing. Yuhei Nakamura, crouched behind the plate, said nothing for a full 3 seconds after receiving that first pitch. Then he stood up, walked halfway back to the mound, and said something to Ohtani that would later, when Nakamura finally spoke to American media about what he experienced that morning, make headlines on 3 continents. But before we get to those words, before we get to the reaction that spread from that practice field into the American baseball conversation and ignited a debate that is still burning, we need to go back to the beginning of that session. To what Ohtani was thinking when he picked up a baseball and decided that today was the day he would show everyone exactly where he actually stood. The weeks leading up to Ohtani's live batting practice appearance had been defined by careful language and managed expectations. The medical updates were measured. The public statements from Samurai Japan's coaching staff were responsible. The tone from everyone authorized to speak about Ohtani's physical condition communicated the same essential message: patience, caution, process. Even those closest to the team had quietly recalibrated their expectations. Not abandoned hope, but adjusted it. The way you adjust when the information available suggests that the full version of something extraordinary may not be immediately available. Ohtani was aware of every adjusted expectation. He is always aware. This is one of the things that separates him from other great players, not just the physical gifts, but the extraordinary attentiveness with which he monitors everything happening around him. The atmosphere of a training camp. The energy of his teammates. The precise weight of every unspoken assumption floating through a locker room. He felt the adjusted expectations. And on the morning of the live batting practice session, he decided, quietly, without announcement, without drama, to address them directly. Not with words. With a baseball. Sources inside the Samurai Japan camp described the moments before Ohtani took the mound as completely unremarkable. He went through his warm-up routine with the same methodical precision he applies to everything. Arm circles. Band work. Long toss progression building in careful increments. Nothing about the external presentation suggested what was coming. Nakamura, getting his catching gear on behind the plate, has said he had no advance indication of what the session would produce. "I knew he was going to throw," Nakamura told American media later. "I didn't know what I was about to receive." The first batter stepped into the box. A Samurai Japan position player, experienced, professional, a man who faces major league caliber pitching in his daily work and is not easily impressed by velocity or movement. Ohtani went into his windup. What came out of that delivery was not the cautious, controlled, feel-your-way-back offering of a pitcher easing into readiness after physical limitation. It was not the half-effort version that smart competitors use when they are protecting themselves while publicly demonstrating availability. It was Ohtani. Full Ohtani. The version that has made grown men look foolish at the plate in Anaheim and Los Angeles across a career that has redefined what baseball allows a single person to be. The velocity reading that circulated through the coaching staff, the number that was whispered from person to person along the third base line, produced a reaction that one witness described as collective disbelief. Not because the number was unprecedented in Ohtani's career history, But because nobody in that practice facility had expected to see that number on that morning, under these circumstances, from a pitcher who had been described for weeks in the language of careful management and cautious timelines. One Samurai Japan veteran, a player with multiple WBC appearances on his resume, stepped out of the box after his second swing and said something to nobody in particular, just exhaled it into the morning air, that another player standing nearby picked up and later repeated. He's on a completely different level. To understand what that batting practice session felt like from the most intimate possible vantage point, you need to hear it from Yuhei Nakamura. Because the catcher receives every pitch in a way that no other participant in a baseball game experiences, not just visually, not just analytically, but physically. The full force of a pitcher's delivery arrives in a catcher's mitt as information that bypasses analysis and registers directly in the body. Nakamura has caught some of the best pitchers in Japanese professional baseball. He is not a man who is easily moved by velocity or movement. He is a professional, and professionals develop a calibrated baseline for what elite pitching feels like. Ohtani, that morning, moved the baseline. When American media caught up with Nakamura in the days following the session, drawn by the spreading accounts of what had occurred on that practice field, he was careful with his words in the way that Japanese players often are when speaking publicly about a teammate. Respectful. Measured. Aware of the weight that public statements carry. But even within that carefulness, what he said stopped the American reporters in front of him. He described receiving Ohtani's pitches that morning as a physical experience unlike anything he had encountered behind the plate. Not just the velocity, though the velocity was, he confirmed, something that required immediate adjustment even from a catcher of his experience. It was the combination. The way the fastball's movement and the breaking ball's depth and the splitter's disappearance work together as a system, each pitch making the others more dangerous, each offering creating a problem that the previous offering had set up. When you're behind the plate, Nakamura told the assembled American reporters, you feel the difference between a pitcher who is good and a pitcher who is doing something else entirely. That morning, he paused, choosing his next words with visible care, I felt something else entirely. Then he said what Ohtani had told him between innings of the session. The remark that produced silence in the media availability room before the questions started coming faster than they could be answered. Ohtani had looked at him during a pause in the session, not boastfully, not with any performance of confidence, and said simply, I feel like myself again. 4 words. But in context, in the specific context of everything that had been carefully managed and quietly worried about and publicly navigated for weeks, those 4 words carried a weight that Nakamura understood immediately and that American media, once they received them, recognized as the most significant thing said inside a Samurai Japan training camp since the tournament began. I feel like myself again. Not, I'm feeling better. Not, the recovery is going well. Not the careful, conditional language of someone who has been coached to protect themselves and their organization with hedged optimism. I feel like myself again. The implication was total. Ohtani was not describing a partial return, a managed availability, a cautious re-emergence. He was describing completion. The return of the full version. The thing that the adjusted expectations had quietly. Randy Johnson, whose own career was defined by the particular terror that elite pitching imposes on every other participant in a baseball game, spoke about Ohtani's session in terms that cut directly to competitive reality. When a pitcher of that caliber says he feels like himself, Johnson said, every lineup in this tournament needs to recalibrate. Today. Not tomorrow. John Smoltz, who has spent his post-playing career developing one of baseball's most analytically sophisticated voices, focused on the specific significance of Nakamura's account. The catcher knows, Smoltz said simply. Before the radar gun, before the video analysis, before any of the data, the catcher knows. And Nakamura told us exactly what he knows. Yadier Molina, whose career behind the plate gave him a perspective on pitcher communication and self-assessment that few people alive possess, addressed Ohtani's 4 words directly. A pitcher who says, I feel like myself after coming back from something difficult, that's not confidence talking, Molina said. That's information. He knows his body better than anyone. If he says that, believe him. The Japan vs Venezuela game was already weighted with competitive significance before Nakamura spoke to American media. Before the batting practice session that stopped a practice field full of professionals in their tracks. Before 4 words traveled across the Pacific and landed in the American baseball conversation like a depth charge. Venezuela's coaching staff had built a preparation framework around a specific set of assumptions about what Samurai Japan would bring. Detailed, serious, professional preparation, the kind that a roster of Venezuela's quality demands and delivers. Those assumptions need to be rebuilt. Because the version of Samurai Japan that Venezuela prepared to face and the version that may actually take the field when that game begins are no longer guaranteed to be the same thing. And the specific variable that has changed, the one that no amount of preparation can fully account for, is standing in a practice facility in Japan, telling his battery partner that he feels like himself and throwing a baseball that is making everyone who receives it recalibrate everything they thought they knew. Venezuela's players are professionals. They will adjust. They will prepare again, from the updated information, with the seriousness that this tournament demands. But there is a specific psychological weight to preparing for Ohtani that is unlike preparing for any other player on earth. It is not just the velocity or the movement or the two-way threat. It is the accumulated evidence, session after session, season after season, moment after moment, that this person operates at a level of competitive intensity and physical capability that simply does not respond to the normal rules. He's on a completely different level. One Samurai Japan hitter said it into the morning air after stepping out of the box. But it wasn't really about hitting. It wasn't really about that one batting practice session. It was about the thing that every person who has ever shared a field with Shohei Ohtani eventually arrives at, the recognition that the framework you brought with you to understand elite baseball needs to be expanded to contain what you are witnessing. Pull back from the tournament. From Venezuela and the WBC bracket and the pitching matchups and the lineup decisions. Pull back from Nakamura's quotes and the American media coverage and the MLB legends weighing in with their calibrated assessments. What you see, when you pull back far enough, is something simple and extraordinary. A man who was limited. Who was managed. Who was surrounded by careful language and adjusted expectations and the well-meaning caution of organizations and medical staffs doing exactly what they are supposed to do. Who walked to a mound anyway. Who threw a baseball the way he throws a baseball when he is fully, completely, undeniably himself. Who turned to the man crouched behind the plate, the man whose mitt had just absorbed the physical reality of what Ohtani pitching feels like, and said 4 words that made every adjusted expectation in that practice facility instantly obsolete. I feel like myself again. The WBC has its full participant. Samurai Japan has its full captain. And the baseball world, from the practice fields of Japan to the studio desks of American sports media to the preparation rooms of every team that might eventually face him, has been reminded of something it occasionally allows itself to forget. There is Ohtani. And then there is everyone else. The gap between those two categories is not measured in statistics or contract values or individual awards. It is measured in the sound a catcher's mitt makes when the right pitcher is on the right mound feeling exactly like himself. Nakamura heard that sound that morning. He wanted to make sure the rest of the world heard it too. The batting practice session ended. The players dispersed. The practice field returned to its normal rhythms. And Yuhei Nakamura sat with what his mitt had told him, the specific, unambiguous, physical truth of what it feels like to receive Shohei Ohtani when Shohei Ohtani feels like himself, and decided that some truths are too important to keep inside a catching mitt. He was right.